Hello everyone and welcome to Royalty Now, where we bring you face-to-face with figures from the past. Eleanor of Aquitaine was one of the Middle Ages' most powerful women, and it was said one of the most beautiful. But what do we really know about her appearance? Today we'll dive into the mystery of Eleanor's beauty and reveal my recreations of her appearance at the end. Hit those like and subscribe buttons and let's get started with a little context of Eleanor's life. Somewhere between 1122 and 1124, Eleanor of Aquitaine was born in Bordeaux, France. Although, like much of her life, the exact date remains a mystery. Not only was Eleanor vastly wealthy in land and in gold in her own right, she was also the queen of two countries. First, she was Queen of France through her marriage to King Louis VII, and later she was Queen of England as the wife to King Henry II. Even after her husbands passed away, she didn't just fade into the background, she stayed right in the thick of power and influence through her sons King Richard the Lionheart and King John. In fact, pretty much immediately after her death in 1204, the Angevin Empire, when England and parts of France were ruled by one king, fell apart. But chroniclers from her time were really quick to try to slander her good name, making up rumors that she was committing incest with her uncle. And later writers in the 14th century said that she had Henry II's mistress Rosamund Clifford murdered. And those are just a few of the rumors that have followed her throughout the centuries. Historians call this the Black Legend, the smear campaign of Eleanor after her death. Primary source, true information about Eleanor is really scarce. So scarce, in fact, that scholars have remarked that it's almost suspicious. Most of what we really know about her is as a peripheral figure in the accounts written about famous men in her life, or accounts about events written decades after they transpired. And we of course don't really know what she actually looked like. The stone effigy on her tomb at Fontevraud Abbey is all we have left of Eleanor's appearance. So in order to make a recreation, I've done what I can to reconstruct the tomb, and we'll use what we know of the time to inform my work. So let's start with that. Let's start with what Eleanor would have actually worn in real life. Around the turn of the 12th century, noble fashion took a rather flattering turn. Women started wearing the blio, a style that was surprisingly comfortable compared to the heavy and restrictive layers of later centuries. There were no corsets or excessive layers, just a soft linen shift worn under a slim-fitting gown. These dresses were often made from a single flowing piece of fabric with dramatic flared sleeves. If you've ever seen the famous painting The Accolade by Edmund Blair Leighton, that's exactly the medieval princess kind of silhouette we're talking about. The waist would be accentuated with a cloth belt, creating a look that's still really flattering by today's standards. As queen, Eleanor would have worn soft linen or silk, unlike the basic wool fabric of the lower classes. She'd also have access to the most beautiful, vibrant red and deep blue dyes, which were really popular colors of the time. Since artisan goods like this had to travel all the way from the Byzantine Empire, Spain, or Venice, they were status symbols that a powerful woman like Eleanor could enjoy. Luckily, in today's world, you don't have to be royalty to enjoy handcrafted artisan goods. But I can still guarantee you that since Eleanor was a woman of taste, she would love today's sponsor, Wild Grain, the pioneering bake-from-frozen subscription box that partners with small bakers and pasta makers across the country. From frozen to on the table in 25 minutes or less, Wild Grain brings you delicious, quality breads, pastas, pastries, and more. Your only job is to pop them in the oven. With a young baby to care for, the convenience of Wild Grain has absolutely changed our nighttime routine. You know how after a long day, you're thinking about what to have for dinner and it just feels like it takes so much energy? Maybe you have an idea for the main dish, but what do you do for the sides? For us, Wild Grain is such an easy way to complete a meal. Making pasta? Add some olive oil ciabatta on the side. Having eggs for breakfast? Add some croissants to round things off. The quality of the food is just incredible. It's something that I've never been able to find at the supermarket. And as a bonus, it's the easiest way to impress my in-laws I've ever found. Find out for yourself why USA Today has voted Wild Grain as the best food subscription box 3 years in a row. Use my link in the description and use the code ROYALTYNOW to get $30 off your first box, plus you'll get free croissants for life. When the weather turned cold, she could don a fur mantle. A squirrel fur mantle. Yes, that's right. The most popular fur for royals at the time was squirrel. People really liked the soft blue-gray tones and the way it created a subtle striped pattern when it was stitched together. In terms of hairstyles, this era was also rather relaxed. Women would wear 1 or 2 long braids, sometimes even adding to these with extensions if they were wealthy enough. Married women did still have to cover their hair and wear a veil, and in this time they included a chin strap called a wimple. But they weren't as modest as you might think. Hair was allowed to peek out from under the headdress, and the braid was allowed to show, giving the look a softer feel than later centuries. So what did people from Eleanor's own time actually say about her? The legend of the French queen as an exceptional beauty has to come from somewhere, and it turns out it does. 2 chroniclers from her era, Richard of Devizes and William of Newburgh, describe her as a beauty who aged remarkably well, holding on to her looks well into middle age. One even reaches for the Latin word purpulchra, meaning more than beautiful, to capture something that apparently exceeded ordinary description. A German poet who briefly caught sight of the queen was moved to write, "Were all the world mine from the sea to the Rhine, I'd give it all if so be the Queen of England lay in my arms." And Matthew Paris, writing about 100 years after her death, said poetically, "By reason of her excessive beauty, she destroyed or injured nations." It's not exactly an abundance of evidence, but for a queen whose life has barely been documented, it's actually really striking how much of an impression she left. What nobody thought to record, unfortunately, was anything as useful as her hair or eye color, which means modern historians have been forced to speculate. And by speculate, I mean invent, because they can't seem to agree on anything. W.L. Warren calls her a black-eyed beauty. Frank McLynn goes further, describing darker skin, black eyes, black hair, and a curvaceous figure, which I'm not sure where he got. Desmond Seward goes in the opposite direction entirely, suggesting yellow hair and blue eyes. Douglas Boyd gives her long auburn hair and green eyes. And finally, Alison Weir lands somewhere in the middle, saying she had red or auburn hair. But at least Alison Weir has a little something to back her up. In 1964, at a chapel in Chinon, France, a piece of plaster came loose from the wall. Behind it was a vivid mural thought to have been painted in the 12th century. It shows 2 crowned figures, which some scholars think could be Henry II, a known redhead, and his wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, shown with auburn hair. However, there is literally no evidence for this beyond wishful thinking. In fact, prominent Eleanor author Elizabeth Chadwick points out that the clothing on these figures depicts them all as male, and I can completely see that. After researching this thoroughly, it really feels like each biographer kind of had their own image of Eleanor in his or her mind, and then they just wrote it down. No one really has any idea. I'll just add my 2 cents. I'm suspicious that Eleanor had light hair and light eyes simply because she was lauded for her beauty, and those were the beauty standards of the time. Now, this nearly 1,000-year-old effigy is all we have left of Eleanor's real appearance. She lived to the ripe old age of 80, which was probably enough time for her to have a say in what her tomb would look like. She may have had a hand in designing it. She's obviously depicted in her prime on this tomb and not the true age she died. If we're being honest, photographs of the effigy from a good angle are scarce. As I settled in to make my recreation, I noticed the tomb itself was so badly worn down, it's hard to tell what's even going on. It clearly shows a tall, slender woman with long features, but that's about it. It's also meant to be a stylized representation, not a completely realistic image. Effigy artwork improved a lot over the years, like this later sculpture of Queen Elizabeth on her tomb, but the idea of including a likeness of the deceased on top of the tomb was a new idea when Eleanor died. So I started by fixing up the images of the tomb. I digitally restored some and then thought, you know what? Let me just make a quick cartoon sketch to really understand her features. I was laughing to myself because I thought my sketches ended up looking like that botched Jesus restoration, but they really helped me figure her out. In the middle of my coloring, I thought I had a moment of genius. I thought I saw a blonde braid coming from under her headdress and bound with white fabric, looking like these reference images from the Middle Ages. Thinking I solved a historical mystery, I was ecstatic until I looked at the statue from a different angle. There's no braid in sight. It looks like it's just her cloak. There are no photographs of her tomb from directly above, so I created a speculative image of her from the front, using my cartoon sketch as a guide, and then created her face from that. So with all that in mind, let's see what Eleanor of Aquitaine may have looked like now. Thank you all so much for watching. I had such a good time making this video, making these recreations. If you liked it, please hit those like and subscribe buttons, and we will see you for the next one.